I'm going to have to let you go, Peter said loud enough for the entire department to hear. Not in his office. Not in HR. In the middle of the Tuesday compliance meeting while I was still clutching my coffee thermos like it could keep me grounded to earth. I thought he was joking. Some sick finance bro prank. But then I saw it. The manila folder. Not the usual one, not the quarterly forecast. A termination letter already printed. My name spelled perfectly across the top in 12-point Times New Roman. He handed it to me like a receipt for bad service. My hand was shaking so hard I almost dropped it. That's when I noticed the date. 2 days ago. Not today. Not after my supposed negligent reporting. 2 days ago. I'd spent the weekend triple-checking that budget revision Peter urgently wanted. 12 years I'd been with this firm. Not one single compliance flag, not one late audit. I had PowerPoint slides older than Peter's bod. And now here I was getting axed in front of the interns over a spreadsheet formula that miscalculated an end-of-year accrual by a margin of $481.73. Not even enough to cover Peter's daily lunch order. Filet mignon and lies medium rare. He smiled when he did it. That's what broke me. Not the firing. Not the snickers from the peanut gallery pretending not to watch. The smile. It didn't say I'm sorry. It said checkmate. Like he'd been waiting for this moment. And hey, while you're here, real quick. 97% of you listen to stories like this and don't hit that subscribe button. It's free. It takes 1 second and it's the reason this team wakes up and keeps digging into these wild tales of betrayal and revenge. Go on, tap that thing. I'll wait. Anyway, I walked out of the building like a ghost. Not crying, not even mad, just unraveling. Like someone had cut a string inside me, and all the pressure keeping me upright started leaking out through my shoes. My thermos was still hot in my hand. It had my name on it in faded label tape like some cruel joke. Peter didn't even give me the courtesy of an exit interview. No chance to explain. No HR rep, just pack your things and a smug, "We'll be fine without you." As if the code of that entire compliance database didn't live in my brain. As if I hadn't written half the internal controls they pretended to audit. On the elevator down, silence. The young accounts guy, Kyle, I think, wouldn't make eye contact, but he reached out before the door shut and said, real quiet. "You didn't deserve that." I didn't, but I wasn't done yet. When I got home, I dropped my badge on the kitchen counter like it was radioactive. Sat down, opened my laptop, clicked into the external backup drive hooked to my NAS server, buried behind a drawer of takeout menus and expired printer ink. Because Peter may have smiled, but what he didn't know, what none of them knew was that every report I'd ever touched had a mirror copy archived at home. Every adjustment, every expense line, every footnote tagged internal vendor services or board-related discretion. And suddenly, the smell of smoke cleared from my brain. This wasn't about a typo. This wasn't a firing. This was a cover-up. And I was the last one standing between Peter and a crime scene dressed in spreadsheets. I didn't take off my coat when I got home. Just dumped my purse on the kitchen table, dropped into the chair like the bones in me quit the job, too, and stared out the window at nothing. Neighbors were mowing, kids yelling at squirrels, some Amazon truck hiccuped past. The world kept moving while I sat there with a termination letter dated before I even made the so-called mistake. I kept seeing Peter's face, that little smirk of his, like a man who'd pulled the last Jenga block and knew the tower was coming down on someone else's head. He knew what he was doing, had probably practiced the line in front of a mirror while smoothing his discount blazer. Imagined him in his office right now, sipping something neat and imported, already rehearsing how he'd frame my firing as decisive leadership during the next board call. I was still gripping my thermos, half full, lukewarm now, and trembling in my hand like it knew something I didn't. That stupid label tape with my name peeling up at the corners like it was ashamed to be mine. The kind of grief I felt wasn't loud. It was needle-sharp, surgical humiliation pressed into me like a hot iron. But grief's got a half-life, and mine was about 12 minutes. I kicked off my shoes, walked over to the drawer beneath the dusty Keurig and yanked it open. Under expired coupons and 6 dried-out pens was the hardline to my NAS server, the one I set up 5 years ago after the IT department accidentally wiped a whole quarter's worth of reconciliations. Since then, my personal machine had been running nightly syncs of every project folder I ever touched. I cracked open my backup laptop like it was a coffin and booted it up. It still had the sticker from my last compliance conference on it. Ask me about Sarbanes-Oxley. Funny how nobody ever actually did. The folders loaded. Everything was there. From my first risk model in 2012 to the dummy audits Peter waved through during the last restructuring. Opened the most recent batch, the last 3 quarters budget memos just to torture myself a little. And that's when I saw it. Line item after line item tagged with innocuous names like external vendor consultant retainer or strategic operations float. But the numbers didn't match. The math was too clean, rounded to the hundredth, tidy in a way that real expenses never are. And there was a $500,000 legal prep disbursement paid to a consulting firm that hadn't had a website since 2018. Another, a recurring $97,000 monthly charge under a vendor name I knew was linked to a shell from an M&A deal Peter swore was dead in the water. My mouth went dry. These weren't just mismatches. These were camouflage. I opened a fresh spreadsheet and started copying the entries down, tagging vendor names, amounts, approval chains, all of it. Somewhere in the middle of cell F27, I realized I'd seen this pattern before years ago when I had flagged a single weird transfer to an offshore account buried under an asset recovery memo. Peter told me it was a write-down from a failed acquisition, scolded me for chasing shadows, and had me pulled off that project the next week. And like an idiot, I let it go. But now the shadow was bigger, deeper. The trail I just opened was winding straight through years of slush money disguised under compliance jargon only I could unravel. He thought firing me would make this vanish. That I'd curl up, cry into my cat, and maybe rage post on some forum. He didn't know he'd just shoved the only person with a full copy of the receipts into a very, very quiet room with nothing left to lose and every reason to get even. By midnight I had 17 windows open across 2 monitors, one lit with Excel spreadsheets like stained glass, the other trailing a constellation of PDFs, invoice scans, and Slack exports. The NAS drive hummed like it knew it was being weaponized. What started as one line item had mushroomed into a 5-year wormhole of fiscal gymnastics. Peter hadn't just padded a few expense reports. This was coordinated, elegant, even kind of corruption that doesn't look like corruption because it wears compliance language like cologne, strong, technical, and designed to make people nod and move on. He buried fraud under the kind of lines nobody questions: deferred integration initiatives, equity risk mitigation advisory, post-merger human capital alignment. If you say it fast enough in a meeting, everyone just assumes it's above their pay grade. But I'd written some of those budget categories. I knew what they were supposed to look like. And what I was seeing wasn't just fuzzy math. It was a damn opera. Recurring vendor payments that matched no contract I ever saw. Transfer approvals with time stamps outside normal working hours. Every year, right before the audit window closed, just enough money moved around to keep balance sheets clean, but never explainable if someone really dug. See that we paid a private equity partner for services that never happened, then wrote down the loss on another sheet. And then it hit me. One vendor name kept reappearing, sometimes with a hyphen, sometimes abbreviated, once even written backwards like some kind of inside joke. Benwick Strategies LLC. I almost laughed. Benwick. That was Peter's old college roommate. I remembered him from the holiday party 3 years ago. Slippery guy with a Rolex and a handshake like a jellyfish. Peter introduced him as an old buddy in consulting, which I now realize is executive code for money laundering with a LinkedIn profile. I yanked open my clean templates folder, dragged in a fresh doc, and started typing like I was prepping for deposition, dates, amounts, vendor aliases, who signed what and when. Even pulled archived Slack messages from when I casually asked about a $320,000 talent optimization fund allocated to a branch that didn't exist. Just internal shuffling, Peter had said. Nothing to worry your pretty head about. I remember that exact phrase. Nothing to worry your pretty head about. He said it with a chuckle like I was a child who'd asked why the sky was blue. There were other moments, too. Dozens of times I'd flagged unusual disbursements and been handed coffee instead of answers. Told to focus on the real numbers or reminded that not everything needs your signature. Little breadcrumbs that I'd brushed off because I trusted the system. Trusted Peter. Trusted that 12 years of clean audits meant something. But they didn't. I was the only firewall between his scam and the outside world. And the moment I sniffed too close, he torched me. Fast, surgical, and public. Preemptive strike in broad daylight. But he forgot one thing. He trained me too well. Every clean version I was assembling now was meticulous. As if the SEC themselves had handed me a clipboard and said, walk us through it line by line. I was naming files things like Benwick pattern cross-X LSX and Peter approval slip 3EMF. I wasn't just building a report. I was laying out an indictment. Somewhere between the fourth and fifth consulting disbursement tied to that ghost LLC, I leaned back, cracked my knuckles, and felt something click into place. He thought I was gone, but I was just getting started. The sun was coming up, but I wasn't done. I wasn't even tired. That wired, bone-deep insomnia had settled in, like my nervous system handed the wheel to my sense of justice and said, have at it. I moved like a surgeon, focused, cold, deliberate. Every keystroke had intention. Every file had a purpose. I wasn't just collecting evidence anymore. I was preparing for war. A war waged in PDFs and metadata. One where the scalpel wasn't a subpoena. It was clarity. First step, whistleblower statutes. I'd skimmed them before, back when an XG got ousted for flagging a data breach and was buried under an NDA like a mob hit. But this time, I wasn't skimming. I was absorbing. Section 302 of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, Dodd-Frank Protections, SEC Form TCR Submission Protocols, IRS Whistleblower Informant Awards, legally turned into scripture. I wasn't going to be caught stumbling. No, I was going to show up in their inboxes like a forensic ghost with a file index. I loaded everything, evidence folders, source trails, Excel comparisons, invoice scans, into an encrypted archive, 256-bit AES with a passphrase that would make the NSA sweat. Then I printed hard copies on acid-free paper, no traceable IDs. Those files got dropped in 3 different locations. One in my home safe, one in a bank deposit box I opened under my maiden name, and one, my favorite, sealed in a manila envelope labeled insurance policy, do not shred, and hand-delivered to my cousin's law office in Des Moines. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being methodical. The real turning point came when I read a line on a legal advice forum. If you've been terminated, the company cannot enforce internal confidentiality clauses regarding observed fraud. I reread that sentence 3 times, sat back in my chair, because they fired me publicly. No NDA, no hush money, no offboarding paperwork that tied my hands. I wasn't just free, it was legally clear to burn the whole rotten house down. And that's when I opened the real gold mine. Buried inside one of Peter's final approval PDFs, when he must have signed off late at night using his personal email by mistake, was a memo with the subject line Q3 restructure, sensitive eyes only. The language was subtle, polished, but but I know sanitized executive speak when I see it. Referenced a quiet restructure designed to optimize headcount ahead of regulatory review and reallocate discretionary surplus for long-term advisory retention. Translation, layoffs, shell payments, bonuses through dummy vendors, the whole scheme. And it predated my firing by 6 weeks. Meaning they knew. They planned it. They needed me out of the way before that audit cycle kicked in. I wasn't just a risk to their scam, I was the only person with the knowledge and the nerve to unmask it. I sat there dead-eyed, rereading that memo. Somewhere outside, birds were chirping. A jogger trotted past my window, oblivious to the fact that inside this unassuming house, someone was building a bomb made entirely of truth. The irony? Peter always mocked me for over-documenting. Thought my obsession with audit trails and redundant logs was a waste of bandwidth. Well, Peter, guess what? Turns out the woman you fired for being too careful? She's about to become your worst damn nightmare. The complaint I sent to the SEC wasn't a Word doc with bullet points and drama. It was a portfolio, tight, chronological, cross-referenced like a goddamn symphony. 63 exhibits indexed by category. Financial misstatement, vendor fraud, internal memos, altered audit trails. Each one stamped with metadata, time codes, hashed signatures, file names so clean you could floss with them. And I didn't stop there. I duplicated the whole package, slightly reformatted, and fired it off to the IRS whistleblower office. Different department, different thresholds, but the fraud fit both molds like a tailored suit: tax evasion, unreported offshore assets, falsified vendor deductions, the works. If Peter wanted to play kingpin, I was giving him the full RICO treatment. Last email I sent was to someone not listed in any government directory. Claire, a lawyer I met 5 years ago at a forensic compliance conference in Chicago. We bonded over boxed wine and our shared hatred of buzzwords like synergize and agile pivot. She'd once told me over a cheap cocktail and a half-eaten chicken sauté, if you ever need to make someone disappear with paperwork, call me. So I did. The message was short. I've got a case. CC plus IRS jurisdiction. Need a firewall and eyes. Files attached. Use the burner I left in your office drawer. She replied 20 minutes later with a single word, received. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I didn't even flinch. Just sat back in my chair and stared at the sent mail screen like it was a tombstone. Not for me, for them. That was the moment. The irreversible step. Could almost hear Peter's smug voice echoing from some conference room across town, totally unaware that his whole house of cards had just been kicked in the throat. The closest thing I felt to happiness? Quiet. That dead silent kind of calm you get after a tornado misses your house by half an inch. Not joy, not pride, just rightness. I stood up, stretched my neck until it popped, and went to make tea. The real kind, not the watery garbage from the office break room. The kettle whistled just as my phone buzzed. Unknown number, no name, no location. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, it rang again. Same number. I answered on the third ring because I don't run. Not anymore. Hi there, said a voice, smooth as laminate and twice as fake. We've heard some things floating around. Just wanted to check in, see if you were considering any legal action, you know, for the press start sniffing. My stomach didn't drop. My heart didn't race. I just stared out the window, steam curling off my mug and said, and who exactly is we? Click. Line went dead. No threat, no name, just a sniff of fear. That's how you know the story's spreading. But they hadn't even begun to sweat because tucked in the tail end of my SEC file was one last gift. 3 separate reports that Peter had signed off on after hours. Nothing odd except when I pulled the metadata, the timestamps didn't match the document histories, meaning he'd altered finalized reports after submission, backdated approvals, shifted numbers, fabricated timing. I had the original files. I had the doctored versions. I had the audit trail of him logging into his VPN at 3:14 a.m. and exporting a file he later claimed he'd reviewed live with the board. I saved that evidence for dessert because when the suits come knocking, and they will, it won't be because I yelled the loudest. It'll be because I documented the quiet parts perfectly. The email had no sender name, just a blank field and the subject line, "Saw what you did." I opened it with one finger, already expecting some trolling finance bro calling me bitter or a lunatic. But instead, it was 2 sentences. Short, brutal. Peter started laying the groundwork for your firing weeks ago. Told compliance leads you were too detail-obsessed to be trusted. No signature, no sign-off, no need. I knew exactly who it came from. Derek, the junior analyst who always refilled my stapler without asking. The one who looked at Peter like he was God until Peter made him take the fall for a botched Q1 forecast and coached him out by proxy. Weeks he'd been plotting my exit for weeks. Not over a typo. Not over a budget slip. 'Cause I knew too much. Because I asked too many questions. Because I made the mistake of being a woman who never smiled when told to relax. I should have felt rage. Instead, I felt confirmation like a steel rod was slotting into my spine. I pulled open my disaster protocol folder and clicked through to a backup upload service with end-to-end encryption. No names, no narrator retention. I zipped up everything, every file, every log, every red flag vendor payment and attached a plain text summary written like a press release. Then I wrote the subject line, "Internal financial fraud materials prepared under whistleblower statute for release if no action by 7 days." I CC'd 4 people, an investigative journalist at the Wall Street Ledger, a senior editor at ProPublica, a finance beat reporter I met years ago at a compliance summit who owed me a favor, and one wild card, a YouTuber whose forensic audits had taken down 2 hedge funds in 2022. The message was simple. This is not for publication yet. Just hold it. If the SEC moves, delete it. If they don't, you know what to do. I hit send. Then I sat back and I remembered everything. Peter telling me to calm down in front of the SOIT after I asked where $2.3 million in consulting fees went during a quarter with no consultants. Peter waving his hand and saying that's not your lane when I flagged that 3 separate vendors shared the same P.O. box in Delaware. Peter chuckling at my paranoia when I color-coded approval chains for a routine expense audit. I remembered the smirk on his face when he fired me. The too fast smile way he didn't look surprised, just relieved. This wasn't revenge anymore. This wasn't about bruised pride. This was about every woman in finance who got called aggressive instead of prepared. Every woman who got told she was overthinking when really she was 5 steps ahead of a man with something to hide. Peter didn't just try to silence me. He tried to erase me. But here's the thing about erasing women like me. We make carbon copies. The kicker. I read a whistleblower statute while prepping my files. Section 7623 of the Internal Revenue Code. One clause buried in the fine print stuck with me. In cases of material financial recovery, whistleblower may be eligible for up to 30% of collected proceeds. I wasn't just exposing fraud. I was entitled to a cut of whatever they clawed back. Meaning, if I did this right, if I stayed sharp, stayed quiet, and pushed this through, Peter wouldn't just lose everything. He'd be paying me for it. It started with a ping on my second laptop, the one I used for firewall scraping and back-channel digging. An alert popped up from a shadow finance forum. I'd flagged it months ago. The kind of place where failed traders and spreadsheet sociopaths post under usernames like BondDaddy69 and pretend they're market prophets. There it was. New thread. Bitter's bitch leaks fabricated files after botching $60 million audit tagged with my initials. A pixelated photo of me from a compliance panel in 2018. Cropped, filtered, and slapped under a header that read, "Never trust a woman who color codes her spreadsheets." The comments were worse. Weaponizing her gender to settle a score. Probably got dumped and needed a new hobby. Another Karen with a grudge. I didn't breathe. Not for a full minute. Came the next hit. A text from an old colleague, Gina. A screenshot from their internal Slack channel. Peter's message bolded. "We're aware of rumors circulating about our firm. Disgruntled former employees sometimes feel the need to lash out. No merit to any of it. Stay focused. Disgruntled former. No merit." He was already scrubbing the narrative clean, planting poison before the bloom. I pictured him with that same practiced smirk, hyping in his office while sipping something neat and bragging to some board member that the fire's already under control. I'd expected pushback, but I hadn't expected it to feel so public, so surgical. I wasn't just being undermined. I was being erased and rebranded as unstable, vindictive, and over-emotional. The same trick they use on every woman who ever told the truth too early. My hands were shaking. For the first time since I started this, I felt it. Fear. What if the SEC stalled? What if this all got dragged into some slow-moving bureaucratic inquest and buried beneath NDAs and pending investigations? Peter had power, money, friends in tailored suits who knew how to spin doubt and drink it with a twist of plausible deniability. And me, I had truth. But truth without force is just paperwork. I stared out the window, unsure for the first time, doubting, second-guessing, wondering if I should have just walked away and let the rot eat itself from the inside. Then my phone buzzed. No name, just a number I'd memorized. Claire. One line, "Check the news at 7 a.m. sharp." That was it. No emojis, no extra context, just 6 words that hit harder than anything the trolls had thrown. I looked at the clock. 6:12 a.m. 48 minutes to go. I made tea with steady hands and didn't bother adding sugar. I sat in silence and watched the seconds tick down because something was coming. And this time, I wouldn't be the one under the microscope. 7 a.m. exactly. I didn't refresh the news site. I opened it cold, like cracking a sealed envelope. No expectations, no prayers, just a sip of plain black tea still steaming in my chipped mug and a browser tab waiting to detonate. And there it was. SEC freezes accounts linked to executive fraud, $60 million missing from Rothstone Capital. The headline sat there like a verdict. No metaphors, no qualifiers, just facts. The kind that ruin golf games and make PR departments chain smoke before noon. The article itself was clinical, names redacted pending further investigation, but the details were unmistakable. Multiple shell entities under review. Financial statements under federal lock. Internal approvals under forensic audit. I knew the breadcrumbs. I laid them. 3 paragraphs in. Investigators cite a whistleblower-provided trail of falsified compliance documents. Off-book vendor disbursements and doctored metadata. That was me. No name, no credit, just impact. I didn't smile. I didn't pump a fist or scream or cry. I just took another sip of tea and watched steam curl up like smoke from a controlled burn. Then came the Slack leaks. Screenshots forwarded anonymously to my encrypted inbox. Company-wide chat melting down in real time. One message stood out, pinned by an anonymous account that somehow CC'd me without tripping any trace. Legal says, do not delete anything. All backups are being pulled. This is federal. And Peter, silent, not a word, not a peep. Just a long threadbare silence where his performative optimism used to be. But I saw the fear secondhand in the nervous emojis, managers typing and deleting. The late-night meeting invites going out like distress flares. There was no mug shot yet. No public perp walk. But I could feel it coming. That weighty inevitable crack in the marble facade. The kind that doesn't make a sound until it's already swallowed the floor. Funny thing, the spreadsheet typo, the tiny mistake they claimed was my mortal sin. It was a column misalignment on a Q4 summary. Ender ID had shifted one cell to the left, landing next to a holding account instead of its legitimate destination. One glance, and any rookie would have fixed it. But that misalignment exposed a dummy entity that wasn't supposed to exist. A ghost vendor tied to no physical address, no billing records, just a line item bleeding 6 figures into the void. It was his sloppiness, not mine. Peter's laziness, his arrogance, his belief that the details didn't matter because the people watching them didn't matter. I was never the mistake. I was the mirror. And he broke himself trying to shatter it. By 9 a.m., the dominoes weren't just falling. They were detonating. Peter's name hit the federal asset freeze list like a thunderclap. His personal accounts locked. Every Shell LLC tied to his college roommate frozen. 5 dummy vendors across 3 states. Red flagged, traced, now part of an official investigation involving the words wire fraud, false accounting, and my personal favorite, conspiracy. The firm's shadow wallets, crypto accounts that no one in legal had ever acknowledged, were drained and dead on the ledger, frozen mid-transfer. One of them had attempted to funnel $1.2 million through an Estonian exchange that flagged it before sunrise. The panic wasn't digital anymore. It was physical. Phones ringing off desks, executives sweating through designer collars, emergency Zooms held in whispers like they were planning a funeral with the cameras off. Then came the subpoenas, the kind with real teeth. FBI, IRS, SEC, one after the other, like a reverse Christmas morning for crooks. The firm's valuation plummeted faster than a trust fall off a cliff. Clients fled. Partners distanced. Board issued a statement that read like it was typed with trembling hands: "We are cooperating fully with federal investigators in relation to significant uncovered fraud tied to a now terminated executive." Uncovered, as if it just happened to rise out of the carpet like mildew. They didn't mention my name, but I didn't need them to. By noon, whispers turned to wildfire. Screenshots of the Slack chaos leaked. Reddit threads lit up like it was Super Bowl Sunday. Professional forums shared posts with headlines like "The Compliance Witch Who Saved Rothstone $60 million, which, not meant kindly, but I didn't care. Let them clutch their pearls and call me names because I was the one who read every footnote. The one who saw through the jargon and polite corruption. The one they underestimated. I never went back. Not for severance. Not for apologies. Not even to gloat. My name lives in encrypted case files now. Legal briefings and whispered warnings across corporate compliance teams who suddenly decided to take internal audits seriously. Peter? He's a headline. A cautionary tale. A LinkedIn profile scrubbed clean, replaced with a silent white page and a pending court date. And me? I'm still sipping tea in the same kitchen, still using the same backup laptop, still watching as the system that tried to chew me up now has to swallow its own tail. They fired me for a spreadsheet typo, but I was the only one who read every line. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.